Bloomcast faz 10 anos e como o Bloomcast é sinónimo de comunicação, seja em tecnologia, sociedade, saúde, energia, até educação e muitos outros, no regresso do podcast discutimos os desafios do presente, mas sempre com os olhos postos no futuro. Junte-se a nós e aos nossos convidados. Seja bem-vindo ao Bloom Podcast.
Este é o Bloom Podcast e eu sou o Rodolfo Oliveira. Estamos aqui à conversa com Henry Coutinho-Mason, o co-autor do livro The Future Normal. O Henry tem uma carreira multifacetada, sempre ligada ao tema da inovação e da identificação de tendências que estão na génese das transformações económicas e sociais. Foi Managing Director da Trendwatching, entidade com quem colabora atualmente enquanto evangelista, e professor associado da conceituada escola EC de Paris. É cofundador da Space e da Redo, duas entidades focadas na mudança em curso no tecido social com o terceiro setor e comunidades sociais. A culminar o trabalho desenvolvido ao longo dos últimos anos nesta área da inovação, o Henry acabou de lançar, em conjunto com Rohit Bhargava, o livro The Future Normal, que visa identificar as tendências e mudanças atualmente em curso que irão definir a forma como vamos viver, trabalhar e evoluir na próxima década. Thank you for being with us today, Henry.
Thank you, Rodolfo.
So, Henry, again, it's great to have you here with us today. So, I'd love to have some of your insights, and so I would start with one simple question, which is why? What has been the driver of your interest on the theme of innovation and social changes, and one area where you have been active for quite some time now?
Yeah, thank you. And it's a great question. So, on a personal basis, you're right. It's been the thread throughout my entire career. So I started studying politics and international relations when I was a student, and then I had this slightly unconventional career path, which you've alluded to. I actually started my career at KPMG, the accountancy firm, before becoming a trend watcher and a social entrepreneur. And reflecting back on this, the common thread between politics and international relations, accountancy and business, and then going into more this commentary role, has been this idea of really being fascinated by how the world works, and more latterly, what the opportunities that change creates for people, and then bringing in the social entrepreneurship, and also hopefully what comes through in the book very, very clearly, is this desire to feel that the world works in whatever way today, change is happening, and that creates opportunities. But there has to be a direction to those opportunities. We want to, or I believe we should all want to, and I'm an optimist about human nature, I believe most of us want to make the world a better place. So it's very cliched, but that's, I think, a large part of what drives me. But when it comes to the book, a large part of what drove me and Rohit is actually the clue is in the title. When we first met, we met at an event in New York, actually, over coffee just before the pandemic. And we recognized each other from our writing online. I'd known Rohit, as I said, virtually at a distance for 6 or 7 years, always followed his newsletter as well. But we bonded over this idea that we were often put in the kind of futurist box at the events that we spoke at, and we were laughing that we were both reluctant futurists, or even nowists, as I've termed myself in previous sessions and presentations. And so that when we were playing around with this idea of working together, we realized that we had both shared this interesting and quite different perspective. There's all of these books about the future. There's thousands of books of future, and there's always futurists and newsletters talking about the future. There seem to be far fewer books about trying to connect those possible futures to the present. What becomes normal? What do we want to become widespread? So it's not, and hopefully this comes through in the book, it's not just an ode to kind of techno-optimism, although we are deeply optimistic, and I'm sure we'll discuss that. We are deeply optimistic, but it's not just about technology will save us. It's about how do we want technology to save us, if you like? What do we want to become normal? So, it's that thinking about the future, but with a slightly different twist on it that really interests me and Rohit, and hopefully interests all the readers.
Definitely. I love that, to be honest. An insight, and what should you say are the changes you have witnessed since you started some main trends, and what things you believe I have not yet fulfilled their role?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'll kind of take two halves because you've got two big questions there: what has changed and what's still to change. The obvious one, right, of course, is artificial intelligence. We were, fortunately for us, ChatGPT came out about a month before we hit print on the book, if you like. So we did have a chance. Interestingly, just as an aside, when we started writing the book, GPT-3 had just been released, right? So it was there, and I managed, through a contact of mine, I managed to get, this was when it was still very closed, you needed to get real API access, and it was really, researchers and kind of some selected corporates. So I managed to get access through a contact of mine. So we had to play around. And it's funny, we'd actually parked that chapter. We knew we were going to write a chapter on the looming possibility for AI. So we had in the world of work, we had the framework in place, but it hadn't quite clicked. And it was actually the final chapter that we had due to launch. And it was funny, if I look back at my notes in the Google Docs that we were collaborating in kind of late 2020, I'd written saying, right, we need to get access to this, and then, it's not quite there, and let's wait and see how it develops. We managed to get a bit of a play around, and of course, right, since hitting print, like, this has been the big trend, which has just, absolutely exploded. Fortunately, the underlying position of the book, which is really exploring this idea that, yes, AI will automate a lot of employment tasks for people, but the less obvious angle that I think people maybe are less mindful of or less focused on is how does it also unlock human creativity? How does it also unlock human potential? And of course, we're still exploring that, but I remain happy that we've taken a point of view which will last, while the manifestations of how that looks like, the tools we're using, change on a daily basis, right? As I'm sure you're aware of. Every time you open your social media profiles, there's 50 new AI apps to use. But this underlying way of thinking about saying, what do humans want to do? And yes, we want to do things faster and more conveniently, but we also want to become better versions of ourselves. We want to become more creative. I think that will remain constant even in the face of significant technological change. So that's clearly a big one, and I'm sure we'll come back and talk about AI, as we go through this conversation. In terms of, what has not yet hit its potential, right? Since we're writing about the trends which I'm most excited about, yet remain kind of most frustrated about in terms of the gap between what is possible and what is normal, right? Actually, what is widespread, are a lot of the sustainability trends. I think one of the chapters that I love is we ask the question, what if everything was biodegradable, right? What if you could embrace a throwaway culture without the guilt? Because we know that changing people's behavior is really hard, right? And we have had 50 years, a generation of this kind of mindset of, buy, use, dispose, right? And we haven't thought about this. And what's happening is there are, really interesting new materials in everything from fashion to packaging. There's biodegradable water bottles coming onto the marketplace made out of bio-based, plastic alternatives, etc. There's fashion, which is biodegradable. So it's happening. But, really we're talking about 0.001% of the market, right? We're talking tens of thousands of items of clothing, tens of thousands of water bottles, when we're producing, as a global economy, trillions of these items each year. So I think for me, this is the real hope within the book, is that we have these amazing solutions. We have these amazing pioneers, and we call them instigators, creating products that really do solve some of the big problems that we face. The frustrating thing, is scaling them. Can they come down to the same price and the same, if not better quality, right? And the same availability for your mainstream consumers? Can they become normal, right? We know they exist in the future, but how do they become normal?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and that's great insight to think about. And going back to the way you look into the future, which is really interesting, you kind of, and you have to guide me on this because this is my take on reading it. You design the book, take into consideration what are the ways people now consume information. Now it would be how can I make it more actionable? How can I make it more easy on the current span of attention that I have? So that's, which is kind of a novelty in the way a book is conceived and designed. And so I'd love to have your ideas on how you reach out to that and decided to do it that way, which is kind of interesting.
No, thank you. And I'm really happy that came through as a message, because of course, we are both voracious readers. Of course, we have to be, right? We're speaking to people, but we're also constantly reading, and we're constantly meeting and talking with, if you like, our own target market, right? Because, innovators, entrepreneurs, executives, these are the people who, yes, we feature in the book, but they're also the people who read the book. And we are just so, mindful. Look, Rohit runs a publishing company as well, right? So he's even closer to this than me. The world is changing. Of course it is. Our information environment is just so radically different to what it was even 10 years ago, certainly what it was 20, 30 years ago. And so we can't fight this, in the same way that we just alluded to with the sustainability and the opportunity for eco-friendly products, circular products. You have to meet your audience where they are in terms of, cater to their existing behaviors in order to become normal for them. And so what we've done is we've created like this choose your own adventure mode as you can go through the book. So it's 30 short chapters. Most of them are 8 to 10 pages typically, and it's really designed to be read in 10 to 15 minute chunks. I mean, of course, if you have 2 hours, 3 hours, you're on a flight, you can read many of them, but you can just pick it up and dive in. And at the back of the book, we create industry playlists. So we say here for these 16 key industries, whether it's like your industry, consulting, professional services, whether it's food and beverage, whether it's hospitality, whether it's healthcare, all of these industries. Here are, if you don't have the time to read the book from page 1 to page 300, you just dive in and cherry pick these key chapters first. We do, of course, make the point that if everyone is if everyone is reading the same chapters, just like if everyone's reading the same material outside the book, your innovation, if you like, will be potentially, again, similar to everyone else's. So we do encourage people to say, cherry pick a few other chapters that you think are a little bit further away from your day-to-day. That's where the real magic happens. But look, we understand you're busy and you don't have time. The other thing we try to do is even within those chapters, as you alluded to make them very accessible. So every chapter is just very simple. It has a big idea, big future idea, where could we be headed? But then it also anchors it in the present today. And as I said earlier, every chapter features an instigator. So it could be a new startup, it could be a new product, it could be an individual, it could be a non-profit, but someone or some organization which is living the trend today. And then at the end, we ask the questions that say, how might this idea look like if you scale what this instigator is doing into new categories, into new parts of the world, into new contexts, into new demographics? Maybe this is just a trend or a business which is focused on the younger generations today, but what would it look like if you're serving a senior demographic, right? Or a different gender, different location, whatever it is. So it is, and that's the feedback we've been getting, is that there are some big ideas in the book, but they're, if you like, they're packaged in small, very accessible nuggets that are really designed to help you have conversations, either with yourself or with your team, or probably now with ChatGPT.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And the thing is, Yeah, you divided in the book in three chapters. The first one is the way we connect, get healthy, and thrive in the near future. And I've seen two of the trends which are really one, because it's very connected to the work we do as a consultancy, and so it's got to do with the certified media, and I really am curious about your take on that. And that I always would also love to have your thoughts on the thing that you address, which is, I think, it's a big thing with modern societies, which is the addressing the issue of loneliness. People are becoming increasingly lonely in the midst of all this context that you can make. You get increasingly lonely, which is a kind of a counterintuitive thing when you think of it, but it's a reality. So what's your take on these two trends, and where do you see these unfolding?
Yeah, very interesting. And I'm fascinated that you've connected those two trends in this question, and I'll explore that in a second. But just for the listeners, certified media was a trend and an idea about, and that's another important point actually. Every chapter in the book, we frame, if you like, around a what if question. What if we could trust the content that we encounter online? That was what we were talking about in certified media. And again, it's interesting because you talk about what's changed and what's not changed. When we first started writing that chapter and looking at it, it was really in the era of the dying days of the Trump administration, right? So it was very politically focused. It was really talking about, the issue of political misinformation. And of course, I mean, that's not gone away. But perhaps today, the bigger issue for most people in their day-to-day lives is the ubiquity of deepfake and synthetic content, right? And we're recording this in May 2023. Just in the past weeks, we've seen deepfake synthetic songs, from a number of artists, right? Most famously Drake. Sorry, yeah, but the Weeknd and the Drake, and there was an Oasis one which I saw being based in the UK. And I mean, interestingly, just as an aside, we've really seen there the difference in reactions to some of these trends. So you've got the lead singer of Oasis, Liam Gallagher, or saying, actually, I really like this. This is better than most of the other rubbish that people put out there. It's amazing. And Grimes saying, I'll split the royalties with anyone who creates AI versions of my music. And if one does really well, let's split the profits. So, and then you have, on the other hand, you have Universal Music, who own the rights to Drake and The Weeknd, pulling the song from the streaming platforms. So, we just see there a microcosm of, actually, there's, for every technology, for every shift, of course, there are two reactions, right? That I'm not going to say which one is valid, right? There will be different positions for different individuals, different organizations. But yeah, so that's a very interesting chapter that shows how the underlying need remains same, right? This remains the same. This idea of trust, and you ask in one of your questions, how did we decide what to write about, right? How do we know that there is such an abundance of things we could write about? How do we choose? And it really is that question of thinking about, what are the things that will still be important to people in not just a year, right? When as the book comes out and when it's published and people are reading it for the first couple of years, but in 10 years, in 20 years, right? And of course, like, trust is still going to be such a fundamental bedrock of society that we've felt very confident about writing it, even though the technology and the use cases may change. I think your point about loneliness, again, what will be important to people, no matter where they are in the world, it's that desire for human connection, right? It's so deep rooted in us. And that was a really interesting chapter to write because, we write a lot about technology. Of course, it's a fast moving thing, but the instigator that we feature in this chapter is actually very low tech. It is a social housing block in Finland, where the split, the residents, if you like, there are 50% young people, and then most of the rest are elderly people, and then 10% are unaccompanied refugees, right? So people who've moved to Finland or Sweden, I think it is, right? Apologies, Sweden. without their family, right, to refugees. So they've constructed this kind of social microcosm of diversity within but not just racial diversity, that's a small part of it. The main focus of the diversity is intergenerational diversity. And they do really interesting small things, like there is no Wi-Fi in people's rooms, right? You know, if you want to use your phone, you have to come out into the social areas, and they have part of the contract of living there. I mean, they say it's not like it's rigorously enforced, but you have to sign up to the idea that you will spend, I think it's 1 hour every month or whatever it is. You know, it's a relatively small amount of time engaging with the community, right, within this apartment block. And so it's a really fascinating, you know, you mentioned this idea that, you know, technology is moving so fast and it's superficially connecting us. But of course, we intuitively know that is also doing the opposite, right? You know, so it can make people feel lonely. And you know, sometimes tech is not the only solution in town, right? So, you know, there's a number of chapters in the book where we explicitly look at what is happening offline, what is happening in the design of the architecture, the cities in which we live, and how can some of these things, which maybe people don't think about on a day-to-day basis, but can actually help improve our health and well-being, which probably is something that most people think about on a daily basis. You know, how do I become a better version of myself? How do I feel healthier, more energetic, etc.? It's something we'll want. And what we're always looking for is, what is a non-obvious angle on this? This was Rohit's series of books, was the non-obvious trends guide. And so, you know, similar to the title of the book, we are always trying to give people takeaways where they can sit and think about it and go to whoever it is, whether it's their clients, whether it's just their family and friends, and say, there is, you know, here is something we can all agree we want, a direction we want to head in, and here is an interesting way that maybe we hadn't considered of how we might get there.
Right, that's awesome. And going to the second chapter you have the second part of the book, focus on the way you live, work, and you consume. And going towards a very, very specific trend, which is the way you analyze what's going on with the big. I think there's a little bit of a division now between people who are advocates for remote work and full remote work, and people are completely against it, and so they want to have again everybody on premise. What are your takes on that? Where do you see that going from your insights on what you've seen in the going on in the context you've made for the book?
Yeah, and you see, that's again just a fantastic example, and to give me an opportunity to talk about, you know, some of the insights that we have in the book. Because the honest answer to your question is, you know, what is the future of remote work and, you know, hybrid, remote, on premises? I don't totally know, right? And I think anyone who says this is the answer, right, is probably, I would be skeptical of. And again, so what we've tried to do is we've tried to explore this topic through an looked at, right, unexamined dimension. And so the two chapters that we have that are particularly relevant here, well, really 3 chapters actually. The 2 chapters are particularly relevant. So one is asking the question, what if there was remote work for all, right? What if blue collar jobs, which have typically been the ones, you know, think about during the pandemic, right? The people who are out on the front line were the physical frontline blue collar workers. Of course they were, right? They couldn't sit in their desks and, you know, stack shelves or drive buses or whatever, right? You know, operate machinery. But this might be changing. Right, and there's an amazing example which I love in the book, which is a fun example, just a little, you know, a marketing example really from, I believe it's Vodafone in the Netherlands, one of the telco operators, to promote the 5G network, the launch of a 5G network. They had a remote tattoo, right? They had a film star. She signed up, and the tattooist was in another part of the Netherlands, and she was there with the robotic arm holding the needle. And this got me thinking, you know, now when you go downtown, what do you see a lot of? You see a lot of coffee shops, you see a lot of tattoo parlors, because these are things which are, you know, so embedded. They have to, you know, our expectation is they have to be physical establishments, right? And I thought, well, this is really interesting. And there's a slightly more serious example in the book of the world's first remote control truck driver, right? And you think about, back in the days before it was graphic designers and writers that were going to get automated by AI, the big fear, right, a few years ago that everyone was talking about was what happens to all of the truck drivers that get put out of a job. And it was really interesting because there's a trucking company called Einride, and they make electric, super sustainable freight trucks, but they are semi-autonomous. And their vision is that actually you will have an individual sitting in a little bit like a military drone pilot, sitting in a shipping container somewhere or in an office with a bank of screens, and they will essentially be controlling up to 10 freight trucks, because the freight trucks are autonomous when they're on the highways. There's very little need for a driver there, but for 90% of their journey. But when it comes to parking, when it comes to doing the last mile, right, in really negotiating, the narrow streets of Lisbon or whatever it is, then you need a human. A human is infinitely more capable of doing this last piece. And we just thought this was really interesting, because this is a whole new reframing of this question about what does the future of remote work and hybrid work look like, which I don't really hear people having this conversation. So, that was one angle that we took on the book. The other one was thinking more about white collar work and office work, is around what is the purpose of a physical office now today, in the world where, many white collar workers can work remotely. And there's a charity in the UK, which I'm actually involved with personally as well, so it's nice to be able to celebrate them, which takes over empty commercial property. And a little bit like the Tom's shoes model, for every desk which is let to a commercial tenant, they give away a tenant. It's done in partnerships with the local authorities. They give away a desk to a social enterprise or a non-profit. And one of the things that this charity has heard from its commercial tenants is this has been one of the most important mechanisms for us to recruit and retain staff. Because you come into a WeWork, and the first day you think it's very exciting because they used to be, before they ran out of money, there used to be beer on tap, right? And they have all the slogans, and it's high end and it's luxurious, etc. But you have no real connection to this, and it's really it's some venture capitalist in Silicon Valley, or maybe Saudi money, right, that's funding this office. Whereas this corporate tenant said, for our team, the office is not so smart and it's not so luxurious, but they come in, when they do come in, maybe just 2 days a week, they come in and they get in the lift and they go up past 50 charities and non-profits and social enterprises on the first floors that they pass. And they know that their rent is supporting the good work that those charities do. And they said this just totally changes their relationship to the community, to the company. It's the type of thing they tell their friends about. And so I think, in a world where physical, getting together, of course, there will be moments, there will be offsites, all of this stuff. But we're really saying, can you use this example of a small project, here in London, where I'm sitting, but can you think about what questions does that cause you to ask about the future, not just of your workforce, where they work, but what the purpose of the office even is, and how you can communicate some of your other messages around brand purpose and positive impact, and roll that into what for many companies is I'm sure for yourselves, is probably the second or third largest expense after your staff costs, right, is going to be your office, even today, right, in a slimmed down environment. So it's some new perspectives on big questions is again what we're trying to do in the book again and again.
Great insights. One thing that you also mentioned, which is really interesting because it's been unfolding now, the same as with the AI, is that corporate activism has become really an issue, and many companies are taking very strong positions in terms of societal issues. And say Patagonia, say this the issue now with Disney, you name it. There's quite a few cases with the abortion in the US. Where do you see that going? I mean, is this something where do you see it going, and where do you see it at all, if you see it stop somewhere? Because I think it's the way that I see it, there's always a risk of overshooting. You get for the basic ideas that everybody kind of agrees with, and then you move into something that becomes a little bit more controversial, and somewhere you have to find a balance. That's the point.
Yeah, I 100% agree, and I definitely think there is with my personal hat on, I think, there will be a backlash, right? Especially in the US, where I think, it is becoming so difficult for not just corporations, but for employees to navigate internally. Taking that aside, I think on a more global basis, because I think the US is a bit of an outlier in this market in terms of, the social and cultural context. I think just for your listeners in Europe and again on a more global basis, I suspect we will look back and feel that, and I think this has already happened internally with organizations, but externally as well. We are going through a transition where purpose, impact, CSR, however you want to brand it, right? It is moving from the marketing function to much more of a core operating function, and whether that's COO, CFO, it has to be much more evidenced because it is saturated. The market is saturated, and I think Patagonia is an interesting case there, because I spent some time while writing the book also helping an amazing entrepreneur here in the UK launch a platform, a content platform, an innovation platform focused on helping people, designers specifically, move away from plastic and get away from plastic. And so what I learned going deep into that sector was that there are a lot of people as well who are actually very skeptical of Patagonia, and I think Patagonia, as you say, are held up as the kind of the beacon on a hill, right? The best example of corporate activism. And I think in the corporate activism space, they are. The gifting of the company into the purpose trust, right, is a truly exciting shift. One that we're seeing of is exploration of new corporate structures for social purpose. We're seeing that with OpenAI as well, and their kind of capped profit mechanism with the Microsoft investment. So we're seeing some really interesting things happening there. But just going back to the challenge for companies is that even in Patagonia, what I learned is amongst environmentally focused commentators, a lot of people are very, very skeptical because 95% of their products are synthetic. They're fossil fuel based, they're non-biodegradable, the Gore-Tex, fleece, it lasts forever, right? It sheds microplastics. So, I think it is a really challenging time for a business. I think, businesses will have to, the message of the book is that businesses will have to follow the leaders, in the sense that what the role of leaders is to raise the expectations of customers across the board in every category. So we see IKEA becoming climate positive, or aspiring to become climate positive, Patagonia going into the purpose trust, right? This will change the expectations of what is possible. But I think in parallel to that, there's an increasing skepticism, right? And an increasing requirement for businesses to be very confident that they can back it up, their claims, to have the metrics, for those metrics to be holistic, i.e. to drive business success as well. If you're going to be more sustainable or more socially inclusive, how does that also help you decrease your costs, increase your margin, increase your retention, whatever it is, right? Your staff retention. So all of those things. But it's a fascinating time.
No, that's great. And prior to wrapping up, I do have one thing that I've been following on your posts, which I think is really great to share with our audience, is the way you perceive the role of AI in the way we work. And your idea is pretty neat, and I really love reading it. So I'd love to have you share it with your audience.
Thank you. But I think it's the idea, how to think about AI is really what I'm trying to explore, because the truth is, I have no idea what the future trajectory of AI is. And what is interesting is neither do the people
Not sure anybody does.
Well, exactly right. We see, Bill Gates, this is the greatest technological development since, the graphical user interface. Elon Musk, I mean, you can be skeptical of his motives, right, in saying it's very dangerous. But, you think about this week it's been Jeffrey Hinton, the godfather of AI, the creator of neural networks, stepping down from Google to say this is dangerous. We need to regulate this. So, look, the truth is, no one knows where this technology is heading, not even the people who are creating it or have created it. However, so I have no deep insights into the future of AI. However, what I have spent the last 12, 13 years doing is thinking about how to understand, how to think about fast-moving change, right? When your business feels like it's very volatile or it's very uncertain, very ambiguous, right? The VUCA world we live in. And the counterintuitive secret to this, which is what our first book, for whatever it was, 5, 6, 7 years ago, was all about, was the way to think about things when they're changing really fast is actually to think about the things that won't change. And there's an amazing quote, which you've heard me in presentations that I've given with you and your clients, from Jeff Bezos, who was at an event, and some journalist asked him, what's going to change, Jeff? What technologies are you excited about? And he said, everyone always asks me this question, but no one ever asks me the alternative question, which is, what is not going to change? And he says, with my management team, that's the question which I think is more important, because as a business operator, as an entrepreneur, as an innovator, you need to invest in the things which you can be confident will still be paying back to you in 10 years' time, right? So this idea that, you can invest in things like convenience for him. He said, no customer will ever come up to me in 10 years' time and say, Jeff, great job, but I wish you had higher prices and slower delivery time. It's never going to happen, right? So when it comes to AI, how I think about AI, or how I speak to my clients, but to think about AI, is to think about, what does AI enable people to do, right? And broadly speaking, that is, does it help you do things faster and with less effort, automation, efficiency, the convenience side of things, or does it help you do things which you couldn't otherwise do before, creatively, intelligently? Does it expand your capabilities? And so that is the framework which I'm thinking about, and saying, once you have that framework, it allows you to talk to your customers, talk to your team, talk to your investors, talk to your board, whatever, intelligently about, this is how we're going to think about our AI-fueled, AI-powered innovations. And this is why, because this is what our customers want. They want to accelerate through this part of a customer journey, and they want to embrace this part of a customer journey. They want to celebrate it, right? This is the part where they really want to be engaged and involved, and let's use AI to help them do that. And everything else, we try and do as fast as possible.
Yeah, that's great. So to close up, I have one very interesting thing, which is this marks our 10th anniversary, this season of our podcast, and also as I think we shouldn't be looking it back, we should be looking into the future, and this is all that you do actually. So I end up with one question, which is, where do you see yourself in 10 years' time? What should you like to be looking back and say, I've achieved this, I've done this? Where do you see, besides having a great success with the book, which I'm sure it's gonna be?
Well, look, I hope that we are still having these conversations, right? Because I always love talking to you. I always love it. It's such an interesting perspective. So I think really for me, it's does this model still work? Is it still useful to people, right? Can I help people understand, as we just discussed, really fast-moving trends? Can we make the world a better place? Can we help scale some of these things which, are with us today, that just need to be, in the hundreds of millions, trillions of units rather than prototypes? So that's where I would love us collectively to be. For me, I would love to just have the privilege, really. I feel so lucky to have this opportunity to speak to interesting people who are creating world-changing products, companies, and I would love to continue doing this. I don't think it ever gets boring. Probably my son, in 10 years' time, he's just about to turn 5. So maybe I will delegate the real trend watching to him, because he will really understand what's coming next. And, with that, I think, you have to know when it's time to hand over to the next generation, because I'm very, very hopeful that they will fix some of the messes that we are leaving behind.
Yes. Thanks a lot, Henry. It was a great conversation, as always.
Thank you so much, Rodolfo. It's always a pleasure to speak, and hopefully we can meet in person again soon.
So